This is a Suk-Jong Lee at the East Asia Institute and also teaching at Sungkyunkwan University. We organize a special webinar, to reflect on the result of November 8th general election in Myanmar, and also to discuss the prospect of democracy in this country. Let me briefly report to the participants about the Myanmar election 12 days ago. As we all know, Myanmar suffered nearly 50 years of isolations under the very strict military rule, but the country went ahead for democratic transition from the midpoint of 2000s as generals, military generals began to loosen their hold on power, facing a very popular democratization demand. The first election was held in 2010. However, as we all know, Aung San Suu Kyi's National League for Democracy, NLD, boycotted it, and then NLD participated in the next 2015 election and won with a landslide victory. And this time, again, NLD won with a huge margin in the bicameral legislative election and can remain in power. I checked the website, and as of yesterday, the NLD secured 396 seats in both the legislature, and USDP held only 29 seats, and other political parties held 45 seats. So compared, if we look at this result, it's fantastic for NLD to claim such a huge victory. And despite the COVID-19, the Myanmar took a free election timely and peacefully. So that's, I think, a great achievement. Nevertheless, there has been criticism calling the election was flawed by canceling polls in Rakhine State. So Rohingya minority couldn't vote. Again, this is a big issue. Anyway, this time election was seen as a referendum on Aung San Suu Kyi's government, and herself and NLD seemed to maintain great popularity inside Myanmar, even as the Rohingya crisis damaged their international reputations. With this popular mandate, would Aung San Suu Kyi and NLD be able to govern the country more freely with no need to share power with the military? In particular, can they change the constitution to give 1/3 of bicameral seats that are controlled by the military to popular voting? That's a huge issue too. Also, can popular NLD government persuade Myanmar people to allow Rohingya refugees return home safely? And despite this election victory, the prospect for Myanmar's democratic transition does not seem to be bright to many eyes, with the strong power of military generals and also very hawkish nationalistic Buddhism. They are very exclusive about this Muslim minority. So to discuss these very important issues, we invited 4 distinguished panelists. Let me introduce them by the alphabetic order of their last name. Our first panelist is Sai Kao Sua Mint, and he is Executive Director of People's Alliance for Credible Elections. And Ko Sai was a co-founder and an instructor of politics at the Yangon School of Political Science, and also worked as a network officer for the British Council. Thank you for attending this webinar. And our second panelist is Richard Lober, and he's research fellow at the German Institute for Global and Area Studies. And Richard is a DPhil candidate in St. Anthony's College of Oxford University. And he is advisor to the Model International Criminal Court, Myanmar. And our third panelist is Ms. Mo Tuzar. She's a research fellow at ISEAS-Yusof Ishak Institute. She's leading the Institute's Myanmar program and also advised Myanmar's ASEAN chairmanship in year 2014. Our last but not least panelist is Mr. Kain Min, Executive Director of Sandhi Governance Institute. He's leading democracy research and social movement activities for transparency and accountability in the public sector of Myanmar. So welcome four distinguished panelists. Okay, so let's start our first round of discussion, and each panelist can speak about 7 minutes. And here, I'd like to hear your opinion, your assessment of November 8 election result. Do you have expected this kind of a huge victory for NLD? If so, why? What were the major issues this time at the general election there? And then NLD government, many people say, is becoming quite authoritarian, but still they seem to be very popular. So some say they have a very rational, pragmatic strategy to just move democracy gradually for the peace. And some people say they are kind of betraying our hope for more strong democratization wave. So to these set of questions, I'd like to invite Kosai first to share your views.
Thank you. Thanks for inviting me. Regarding the result, I think that before the elections, the analysts, the observers, even the political party themselves, majority of people expected NLD will win this election again, but no one expect this big. I don't think even NLD will expect this big a win. So this is kind of a huge, I think, surprise for everyone. That's for clear. But for me, recently, as you just mentioned, that after the elections, in this post-election period, there are a lot of criticism from the main opposition party, USDP, led by the other political party, talking about, criticize about the integrity of the electoral process. So I want to touch a bit on that too, before we move touching the other subject. Mm-hmm. We can breaking down into two phases of electoral process: pre-election period and then election period. So during the pre-election period, everybody was concerned about how the elections was going to happen because of COVID-19, and then because of the tension between political parties and the UEC. The relationship between political party and UEC was very tense. So majority of political party were criticizing about the way UEC managing the electoral process. And everybody was concerning about the COVID-19 situation because we didn't have this capacity in terms of infrastructure, in terms of the preparedness. So everybody was concerning about this thing. At the same time, because of COVID-19, the level playing field was very uneven within the political party. You can see that the COVID-19 situation put a huge restriction on the political party and candidate movement to reach out their electorate. And then UEC could not come up with alternative measures or alternative apparatus or alternatives in infrastructure for the political party and candidate to reach out their electorate. So it creates a huge and even level playing field between incumbent and the non-incumbent political party, and then resourceful and non-resourceful political party. That's for clear. So I think that that made the pre-election period very uneven, and then very concerned for the post-election period. That's we already now witnessing about that. So I think that in terms of transparency, in terms of level playing field, the pre-election period was very shortcoming in terms of democratic principle. That's my analysis regarding the pre-election period. But for the election day, we are very fortunate, and then from here I have to acknowledge the poll workers, the sub-commission members, trying to make sure that everybody was safe, and then trying to run the election smoothly on election day. So on election day was very calm and very smooth than we expected. So that, of course, there were some administrative irregularities, there are some mistakes, but we didn't see systemic fraud trying to change the outcome of the whole electoral landscape. So I think that if we break it down into two parts, the pre-election period was very concerned, and from the democratic perspective, it's very, we can see a lot of flaw. But on election day was very smooth and pretty transparent, and then pretty calm. So I think this is what we have right now. So I think that the political party have a legitimate concerns regarding, and then they have a legitimate right to looking at the current result and then the electoral process. But for me, the result is credible, and then we should accept the result. When it's come to the whole process, 315 constituency, definitely, of course, there are some location and some polling stations, there are issues about voter lists, issues about the advanced voting. But in terms of the whole process, the result is credible. We should accept that. That's for sure. But for the long run, I think that it's already proved that the current electoral legal framework doesn't fit the changing political context. That's something we need to do. Firstly, the independence of the election commission, that's something we need to review seriously. Secondly, when you look at the result, even though NLD won the majority, it doesn't reflect minority political aspiration. So we also need to look at the electoral system. The current system we are using is SPTP, which may not necessarily, I'm not saying that NLD got this majority and NLD doesn't represent the whole country, but there are some minority that still need to be represented at the parliament. So if we need to do so, we need to change we need to review the electoral system. I don't have the answer right now, but something we need to review our current electoral system, whether we can find a way for more inclusive electoral system in the future. These two fundamental electoral legal framework and structure of the change we need to be prioritized in the next 5 years. And on top of this structural problem, we also have the practical issue like something like the travel restriction and uneven level playing field, 90 days voters. So that's also something making the disadvantages for the newcomers. If we can make sure the level playing field, if we can make sure that their voice has been heard at their electorate, there might be some changes at some particular constituency. I don't say that the whole electoral landscape will be changed, but definitely there are high-profile civil society leaders running in some state. There are high political profile activists running in some region. But because of this situation, they were never reaching out their electorate. They were never, their visibility is compared to the incumbent, is really low. So they never had a chance to do so. So I think that whether we should surprise or not surprise, I think that for me, my first impressions and my first analysis regarding the process is something like, so this is my first analysis regarding the November 8 election. I'm happy to come back for more discussion on this.
Thank you. I have a very short follow-up question to Kosai. So it sounds like you are suggesting COVID-19 helped the ruling party to win with more unexpected margin. Do you agree? So COVID-19, because when this kind of pandemic crisis, the voters tend to rally around the government. Does it help the ruling party or not?
What I'm trying to say is, because of COVID-19, some other political parties and some other candidates were not able to reach out. So election should have been more competitive, but because of COVID-19, it's less competitive than with it, because you already see that we have political party merging into one in different state, but because of COVID-19, they were never reaching out what they've been planned. So I think that make disadvantages for the newcomer and make less competitive.
Okay, in that way, help the ruling party. Okay, Richard, it's your turn.
Right. First of all, I'd like to say thank you to the East Asia Institute. I'm very glad to be on a panel with people whose work I respect so highly. Of course, that also is always a difficult task, speaking after someone who summarized things so very well. I agree with most of what Kosai has said, and I'll try and highlight some different areas. And I think starting maybe with the question why it's not so surprising that the NLD has had this kind of victory. And I think that's largely because everyone realizes that the election wasn't really very much about politics, but rather about personality. And this is a dynamic that very much favors the NLD, because Aung San Suu Kyi remains by far the most revered politician in Myanmar, and other parties simply do not have the same level of exposure. And this is sort of even strengthened by the fact that voters continue to vote for the NLD because of its image as the key adversary to the Tet Mador. And this cleavage between the civilian power and the military continues to define Myanmar, rather than, let's say, sort of detailed policy platforms, right? And this is also sort of a question, right? And sort of what is, normally you would ask, what are the defining political elements there for an election, right? What is sort of the discussion all about? But I would go as far as saying it'd be slightly misplaced to highlight actual policy promises or something of that sort as the defining factors for how constituents decided to vote. And this is an important point, because this void of sort of a focus on content is filled with something else, and it's filled with campaigns that are highly personality based, right? And if you look at sort of a lot of the NLD campaigns for MPs, for non-senior contenders or first-time contenders, the campaigns largely revolve around associating yourself with Aung San Suu Kyi and kind of feeding off that popularity. And so you have these personality-based campaigns, and at the same time, then you have a large degree of misinformation. I mean, this is something that's currently, I think a lot of people are sort of focusing on and looking at the misinformation campaigns that have been going on social media in Myanmar, and the hate speech that's sort of attacking individual candidates. And there's also a risk, especially for the NLD, with these highly personality-based campaigns, because if people connect to you based mostly on who your party leader is rather than your content, then should the moment come that that leader, for whatever reason, cannot partake in politics anymore, then you're going to have a large problem. And it's actually something that many people within the NLD, especially sort of the more senior ranks of the party, fear very greatly, is that should that moment arrive, there will be a party split. And since the NLD has this very, strong hold on Myanmar politics, with these majorities in both chambers of parliament, this would of course have grave repercussions also for the political landscape and for the way politics would work in the future. Do I still have a couple of minutes? Yeah, okay. Let's talk a little bit about maybe the difference in perception between the 2015 elections and the elections now. And there's a question of, sort of the waning democratic spirit, and sort of the elections now are perceived in a more critical fashion, right? And I think the key reason for that is that in 2015, Myanmar was to some extent unified by the very high hopes that existed for the future. And many of these hopes, like national reconciliation or further retrenchment of military influence and greater economic strength, have pretty much been squashed now. In Myanmar today, and I think this is sort of when we're talking about also the aftermath of this election, the post-election period, we see a Myanmar that is extremely divided. Now you can say, okay, Myanmar has always been divided along several important lines, but you know the sort of the violent clashes we have seen between party supporters at rallies, also at sort of victory rallies and celebration rallies and campaign rallies before, they bear testament to these stronger divisions. And then also you have an increased problem with the confidence in elections itself, right? And there's still, I mean, no doubt, the confidence is still very strong comparatively, but that we see moves like the USDP's decision to contest the validity of the election results. I mean, these are the kind of developments that we all know from countries all over the world serve to undermine a population's confidence in elections and in democratic process. And it's been said before, the first past the post electoral system really does not help, because it consolidates the divides that do exist in Myanmar today, and it makes it extremely difficult for smaller parties, both ethnic or smaller Burma focused parties to gain seat. And of course, and I think this is sort of something we'll maybe talk a little bit more in the second part. We also have this perception of a waning democratic spirit because of the performance of the NLD, which has plainly adopted some more autocratic governance. But it's important here, and this will be my last sentence, to always be aware that there's a different level if sort of Myanmar observers and researchers and people who work for sort of civil society organizations talking about this, who will raise these issues, or whether we're talking about constituents, voters in general, who I think is fair to say today still very much feel that the NLD protects democracy, and they wouldn't feel that there's a waning democratic spirit.
Thank you, Richard. Now let's turn to Mo. Mo, both Kosai and Richard have discussed it. Now it's time to reform the electoral system in Myanmar. For example, Richard has mentioned this first past post rule is giving more power to big ruling party. So maybe, is there any debate about the introducing proportional portion of electoral divide? You followed elections of Myanmar a long time, so I'm sure you have many things to say. Please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Professor Lee. And I'd also like to add my thanks to Kosai and Richard, who spoke before me, to express our appreciation to the East Asia Institute for inviting us to share our thoughts about Myanmar's elections and the democratic transition in the context of that. Let me just add on to what Kosai and Richard mentioned about the surprise, not surprise element of the elections. I think it was clear to all of us that the NLD would receive a second mandate. That was a certainty, but the surprise element, if any, I think was the different views that existed among commentators, analysts, and so on about the extent of that returned mandate. And of course, now we have seen that it is a resounding mandate with an overwhelming majority that is even higher than the previous historic win in 2015. So let me just say here that it was Myanmar's largest democratic exercise, and as Kosai mentioned too, it was largely a safe and fair exercise for the over 30 million voters who participated in it. And of course, we also have to acknowledge the different aspects and experiences of this historic vote, because the surprise factor, I think, also was maybe the voter turnout. That was more for external observers, and I think people in Myanmar who were quite certain that there would be a high turnout. And both Richard and Kosai have also touched on the disenfranchised voters. Yes, there were people who could not vote at all, and topmost in the international communities, mine would be the Rohingya communities in Myanmar and in the refugee camps, but there were also many people in several ethnic areas across the country where voting was cancelled for security reasons. So for them, you know, there was no participatory experience, and the landslide win would have been more abstract. So what I'm saying is, yes, this is unfortunate, but it still does not disqualify the democratic mandate received by the incumbent. So this is why I'd like to pick up on what Kosai and Richard were talking about, what lies ahead for the democratic transition, about you know, further improving and developing the democratic institutions, so that the democratic processes in Myanmar will be more inclusive and participatory, and become a level playing field for all citizens. Definitely that is important, because, you know, the exercise of democracy is not just elections. You know, good elections don't necessarily translate into democracy all by itself, although elections are an important part, an important ritual of democracy. And of course, you know, then you start looking at the kind of binary choices and decisions that people made in 2015, and again overwhelmingly in 2020. Citizens want democracy. And the simple message, I think, that was very clear at the 2020 vote was, we are voting for NLD because we do not want a larger role of the military in the country's political life anymore. So basically, it boiled down to that. And I would see that you know, this will be another starting point to continue promoting and entrenching the democratic institutions, including that kind of civic education on what democracy means, as in, you know, making that informed choice. So you asked me about this first past the post system that Richard also raised in terms of what needs to change in future for the country's democratic transition. There have been discussions in the parliament during the administration of the USDP, of the Union Solidarity Development Party government over 2011 to 2015. There were some discussions mooted in the parliament then on whether the electoral system and this first past the post versus proportional representation, you know, should be considered. And so I would say that discussion has started, but I think it's still a work in progress, in the sense that there needs to be, I think, more of that informed discussion and debate on what are the pluses and minuses of an FPTP, of a first past the post system. What would be the pluses and minuses for proportional representation in a country that is quite diverse, such as Myanmar, and how that would translate into the different state and regional level assemblies as well. Of course, you know, if you look at it simply, we inherited that first past the post system from the British, and it was written into the 2008 Constitution, which of course then also needs to be reviewed, revisited, and that's another, I think, important priority platform that the NLD government has committed to since 2015, as well as for the current platform. So what I'm trying to say here is that the arguments for and against are still going on, but of course, Myanmar going for a multi-party democratic system, and this was something that was announced when the Burma Socialist Program Party decided to step down, to step aside, and then introduce democracy, or a multi-party democracy type of system. So they use multi-party democracy, which means there are more than two parties. Whereas if you see the first past the post system in practice, it would be, say, for example, what we have seen in the United States. So again, I think there needs to be that kind of crucial conversation that continues on what model fits Myanmar best. And it doesn't necessarily have to be one or the other, but something that actually responds to the very unique, peculiar circumstances of Myanmar's diverse communities.
Thank you, Mo. I guess 3 previous panelists have discussed a lot about how you can reform your election law and rules and kind, but to my mind, even before you discuss how many for the first past post the constituency voting and how many portion of proportional voting, that's more secondary than the more primary issue of how we can turn 1/3 of seats under the popular voting. So military cannot designate their chosen people to 1/3 of bicameral legislature. But it seems like there's no such debate yet. So can you share your thought on this issue too? You need to unmute, Kind.
Thanks for inviting me. Thank you, Dr. Lee. Actually, can you hear me?
Yes, but just speak
Okay,
a little loudly. Okay. Yes.
Louder, yeah. Okay, yeah. Actually, I agree with Kosai and Domoduza. Actually, Kosai pointed out about the integrity of the election, pre-election. So I agree with him, and actually, this institutional landscape was created for me, was created not by NLD, actually by the military. So all of us, all the political parties, they are playing under the 2008 constitution. So that's, I think, one disadvantage for the small party, especially for the ethnic minority. So definitely the electoral system and UEC, the institutional change. So it's required. So we have to change maybe that, but we need consensus. So we need to discuss about these issues, in the parliament, both inside and outside parliaments, both formal and informal way. I think that's very important. With the ruling government, they need to create space for discussing these issues, informally and formally at the same time. But actually here, I want to discuss about public perception, public perception and elite perception. That's because I travel extensively in 2019, 2018, all over the country. So actually, NLD victory, we could expect it, as Kusai mentioned, but I did not expect NLD would win that many seats, but I could expect that it would win. It would, especially in the Burma majority, Burma majority regions. So actually, what I want to explain is NLD victory doesn't depend entirely on Daw Aung San Suu Kyi personality. So I want to point out this fact. Actually, it also depends on the public perception and its performance. So when I visited rural areas and small towns, so I met with people. Usually I discuss and I ask them, what do you think of? What do you think of and the government? So they are also everywhere. They are also issues, but generally they actually they like, they supported, they supported NLD because in terms of infrastructure. So it's very obvious that the roads are better than a lot better than before. So usually that's why I think that we need to be aware that ordinary people, they support NLD because of its budget expenditure. So usually the public opinion is before 2050, 20% of the budget would be was spent, but 80% put into the pocket, something like that. Now 80% of the budget was spent for the community development, but 20% may be wasted. So that kind of opinion people have. I think that's why they want this election, but we do not expect. But at the same time, structural factors also we need to take into account. Actually, before the election, several think tanks, including International Crisis Group, Asia Foundation, and my friend Christian Stokes from Oslo University, they also actually they have written paper articles about electoral system and political parties in Myanmar. So they pointed out the fact that even the merging of ethnic party will not address the problem of the national party winning majority seats, in the election, because of the structural conditions. Usually when you look at the previous history, 1990, 2000, 2010, 2015, usually bigger party, national party, they won the majority. But although the ethnic minority composed of 30% of the population, but usually they won only 15% of the seats. But this time, in my opinion, they performed better than before. Now, for example, SNLD, it became programmatic party. So they embrace all the minority group within their constituency. So they can they could perform well. And More Unity Party also, the More Unity Party also, they won more seats than before. So it's a long-term process. But in this election, I think the main problem is UEC. So UEC, maybe I have to put a blame on UEC. UEC in pre-election period, UEC was not acting like an independent commission. That's a problem. But as you know, NLD also as a ruling party in this, maybe they would see it as a game. They would see it as a game, and then the rule of the game was created by the military. So they might have taken advantage of it. Taken advantage of it. In my opinion, several people, actually political party also, they were encouraging ruling government and UEC to postpone the election because of the COVID-19 situation. But in my opinion, the UEC also didn't postpone. The reason might be they want to gain the legitimacy again, strong legitimacy again, to continue to implement major reforms, political, social, economic reforms. That's why. But now recently NLD issued a statement actually telling the people, telling the ethnic political party that they are on the same page. They actually, the aspiration of the ethnic political party and NLD are the same. So they want to work, they want to cooperate, they want to work together. So I think I don't think democratic spirit is waning. I think actually the people, the majority of maybe the ethnic minority group maybe saying that so only the Burma majority is because of the majority rule. So NLD won or something like that. But actually the people can express their desire for democratization. That's why I don't think that the democratic spirit is waning. I think that the democratic spirit is actually increasing. So we are actually thinking about long term.
Okay, thank
Okay,
you,
thank you.
Klein, to hear that the democratic spirit is not waning at all. Actually, it has been more strengthened. And, you know, I collected 4 excellent questions. I think Klein already alluded to these questions. Let me pose 3 questions to Kosai and Richard and Mo. I guess as Kai-Min has alluded briefly, some participant raises issue of integrity of election, criticizing the Union Election Committee, saying that it is biased. So we need to change the procedure of setting up and reforming UEC. So maybe if Kosai can answer this question will be good. And then second question, I think maybe to Richard, that's about this ethnic minority. And one of participants has emphasized that the NLD won many seats in ethnic states like Chin, Kachin, and Kayin states. So does it mean that NLD secured support from ethnic minorities? So therefore, this election, did it empower the ethnic minority or not? So if Richard can answer this one, that would be nice. And to the third questions to Mo, and reminding the Barack Obama's mentioning in 2012 when he visited the Yangon University, saying that Myanmar's geopolitical significance. So therefore, with this popular mandate, would NLD can exercise a more stronger foreign policy, like to attending ISEAS or the striking big FTAs, and also they're strengthening their position in this delicate China-India relations. So it's a question of a foreign policy. So let's start with Kosai about this independence of this commission.
Sure. I mean, these electoral legal frameworks was initiated and approved in 2008, along with 2008. It means that it's SPTC, a former SPTC was the one who formulated this electoral law. So the law was not meant to move forward with democratic process. The law is just a kind of moving from SPTC to some kind of semi-civilian government. It's kind of transitional document from one regime to another regime. So it's very centralized, even though it was not meant to control the result, but it meant to control the process. That's why the way the election commission appointed was very centralized. The president nominate, and then the parliament need to approve. So it was not impossible to parliament to reject the president nomination. So that was the case. But in the last 5 years, NLD has been facing this issue before 2014. NLD was the one who criticized a lot about the previous Union Election Commission. But during the last 5 years, NLD doesn't touch anything on that. And no political party touch on this issue. That's why we face this issue in 2019 and 2020. That was the case. So I think that it is not, I mean, majority of the people were saying that the personality of the UEC members was the case. I don't think it is the personality can be changed easily. But the thing is the legal framework. So definitely we need to find a way how to make sure the Union Election Commission's member of the Union Election Commissions are independent. There are two ways. One thing is we need to change the constitution. I'm not sure whether it is possible in the next 4 years or 5 years. That's something. But if we can't change the constitution, there are some mechanisms to make sure that the UEC are more independent and non-partisan. Something like the president can create a mechanisms to collect the name for the nomination. and the president can, and the parliament or the president can create a mechanism to select from the nomination and making sure that the UEC is more independent. It's kind of, there are a lot of issues, I mean, like options. If we want to change, we just need a political will. We doesn't need, for the long run, definitely we need a constitutional reform. But before that, there are so many options we can adopt to make sure that UEC are more independent and non-partisan and more credible.
Thank you. Richard, are you comfortable for this claim that the NLD got the mandate from ethnic minorities because they won in the ethnic states? But, you know, I read in Rakhine state, because Rohingya group was excluded from exercising their voting right, there is a rebel group is forming. So there'll be more conflict with the ruling party and the military. So what's your assessment?
I mean, I certainly, wouldn't support this kind of broad statement. I think the first thing to keep in mind is that it's not always useful. I mean, we sometimes we have to use this term ethnic minorities, but it's actually not often it's not a very useful term, because I mean, that's a extremely diverse group of containing different interests, different traditions, cultures, and so also different allegiances, right? I mean, there's some ethnic groups, if you consider, for example, the Lisu, who are traditionally more allied to the USDP because of grievances they have with another ethnic minority. And you have some, I think most other ethnic minorities who strive for sort of their own political parties. But, and we've been sort of through this, it's not a unitary category even within a large ethnic group. So sometimes you have multiple parties that try and win the votes of the same group. And then you have vote splits occurring, which in the first past the post system gives the advantage to the NLD. And I mean, this is very drastic, the way the NLD wins seats, because in some regional parliaments, some of the ethnic political parties can't even win any number of significant seats to make any changes. And this is also, it's kind of partly due to the NLD having pursued a really predatory approach to how they campaigned in ethnic minority areas. We have to understand that, like historically, there's strong alliances between major ethnic parties such as the SNLD and the NLD, right? And these alliances were broken just before the last election, and so far they have not been taken up again, and which means that the NLD campaigns in all the districts, sends out candidates in areas where parties contest that look for their own representation and that were partners of the NLD before. And so that's a shift that the party has undergone. And this is something you bring up, Rakhine State, that at times this approach is deeply troubling, because of course, everyone will be aware that the sort of region government is appointed by the majority winner of the election, by the union government. And so if you take the case of Rakhine, and this is the same in 2015, where you had the party, the ANP, get a sizable number of votes, but can't get it into government, then you have a huge amount of voters who feel disenfranchised. And the same thing, I think, we will be seeing now again. And so I think I wouldn't go as far as making this sort of general statement saying that the electoral districts that the NLD does win in ethnic minority areas constitute any form of broader support.
Okay, thank you, Richard. Mo, what's the foreign policy implications from this election?
Well, usually foreign policy doesn't feature much in election platforms, but I did notice that when the National League for Democracy, when the NLD was putting out the progress that had been achieved or accomplished over its term from 2016 to 2020, they also included a report from on external relations. So I think going forward, looking at the strong mandate that the NLD has, you know, one of the more pressing concerns that the government will need to address now will be twofold. One is addressing that economic and social fallout from COVID-19, which of course many governments across the world now have as the top of their governance responsibility, but also again, dealing with engaging with you know, the international community on the topic that Myanmar is currently under scrutiny for, with relation to the treatment of what happened in Rakhine over the Rohingya communities in 2017. So all of these, of course, will now be refracted through the lens of foreign policy. And I would see, or I would look at, maybe going forward, foreign policy would take on more of the economic diplomacy aspect, in the sense that Myanmar, of course, now is a signatory to the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, which actually was mooted by ASEAN in 2012 as a kind of a delicate balance also between the interests, say, from China, for example, and also the global power rivalry. So ASEAN always tries to bring together this constructive platform where all the partners can try to engage constructively. And the RCEP, which is ASEAN-led, is one of those platforms. So Myanmar, being an ASEAN member, has been a negotiating party of the RCEP since the discussion started in 2012. And you know, Myanmar is also, as a member of ASEAN, party to the ASEAN-Korea Free Trade Agreement, for example, and several other free trade agreements that ASEAN has negotiated as an organization, as a regional body with several dialogue partners. So what I'm saying is, all of these have the multilateral dimension. They are based on established and agreed you know, international rules such as the WTO. So I think Myanmar, of course, will be, I think, in a position to leverage on these different platforms to boost up that economic performance legitimacy, as well as to address the socio-economic fallout from COVID-19. But of course, you see, when we talk about the RCEP now being adopted, that's the step one. Step two is getting it ratified. And for that, all of the governments who have signed this agreement will have to go back to their national legislature and get it ratified. And that's where the domestic consultation processes will start and should start, in order to explain to the different communities, you know, the business community, the investors, but also all the communities in Myanmar, the populations who will be affected by one way or another from the implementation of these agreements, that, you know, what is in it for them and how this will impact them and so on. So, you know, like I said, step two means the national implementation part comes in. And I think that is where the link between Myanmar's international and regional alignments and the national priorities will need to become in sync.
Thank you, Mo. Okay, great discussion. Let's move to the second round of discussion. That's more, you know, the prospect of a long-term road to democratizations. Many people, especially from the West, is saying Myanmar has been stalled in the process of democratic transitions, and it's stuck there, not moving to the next stage of more consolidations. Then for that kind of consolidations happens, what kind of civil military relations have to be there, and then how the the people in Myanmar is ready to go for the further, more consolidated, full democracy. So let's start with the COSI first.
Thanks for the question. It's a great question. It's a big question too. I will rather go from the people perspective. So we've been conducting a survey since 2015, before the election. So trying to test. We just borrow some questionnaires from the Asia barometers, questionnaires from the world value surveys, to trying to test what is the citizen attitudes toward democracies, human rights, and democratic process and good governance or whatever. We're just trying to understand the people perception, and then how as a civil society can engage to improve the perception of the people, commitment to democracy. So the data, I mean, like the Asia barometers, Asia Foundation, and then a lot of surveys show that our peoples are committed to democracy. That's for clear. So it's been proved that in 1990 elections, it's been proved that in 2012 by-election, in 2015, and now it's already proved that the peoples are committed to the path. The only thing is how the people can engage and to promote that. That's a very difficult part, and that's a thing, something I think that the NLD government needs to commit it to. Because from us a civil society member, and as a member, the perspective from the civil society, the role of civil society is very crucial to move forward, to create a space for the people to participate in this democratic, which is crucial, and this is very foundation to move forward to be more democratic society. So I think that for the last 5 years, when we look at it, the indicator from Freedom House, indicator from Free Press, that the indicators are declining because of the regulations regarding the free speech, freedom of associations. The role of civil society has been, I have to say, shrinking and declining. That's the dangerous for further democratic process. We are just the very first, the very beginning of the journey towards democracy. The militaries are staying there. A lot of people has been disenfranchised to participate. Not necessarily, I mean, like citizenship, but also other legal framework and other processes. We have a lot of migrant workers who are not able to participate, even though they are citizens. They are the citizen in Thailand. There are many thousands, millions of people has never participated in the election, and in Malaysia. I mean, a lot of people. So I mean, like, so I think that for me, if we want to move further, NLD government need to, instead of inviting, so need to open up for the citizen or for the civil society to participate in the process, and open up for the media to be independent media, to commit to the democratic process. That's, I think, crucial and fundamental to move forward. For me, I mean, as a civil society member, I would rather press on that approach.
Yeah, I think it will be more sensible with this popular mandate. NLD should feel very confident to open up more, but I don't know, because they maybe still worry about their relations with the military. Maybe that part you can address later. Richard, you know the country well, and you also know the criticism primarily from the Western society, focusing on Rohingya issues. Do you think the West is a little bit biased, emphasizing too much about this minority issues, rather than looking at the overall achievement of NLD for these ongoing democratic transitions?
I mean, first of all, I mean, I would say that in my perception of this, I don't see so strictly a divide between people from, say, Europe and the US and people in Myanmar. In general, I'd say it's a divide between people whose job it is to do research or to focus on sort of policy issues, and people who do not do that, who are ordinary citizens or have some other kind of profession. Because I would say that, you know, many of the researchers are civil society actors, and to some extent people working in politics that I do meet in Myanmar share a grievance over the way the Rohingya crisis unfolded. You know, I think what sometimes does get lost in the West is, you know, there was a series of newspaper sort of headlines and saying, well, you know, now the NLD is sort of cozying up to the Tatmadaw, and they are now sort of best buddies and sort of have a very cooperative partnership because of, you know, Rakhine. Because the West sort of people in Europe, when they see that Aung San Suu Kyi goes to The Hague to make the case to defend Myanmar, they think, well, you know, this must be very pleasing to people in the armed forces. And you know, certainly I think it doesn't harm the relationship, but it goes missing that within Myanmar, and certainly from media that is military affiliated, the NLD and Aung San Suu Kyi are still being depicted as sort of being too close with the Muslim population. And there's sometimes a sentiment that the stance of the NLD on the Rohingya is not strict enough even, right? And so there's not necessarily the alliances that I think sometimes are perceived. But in the future, you know, of course, you know, when we're looking at the question of the sort of democratic challenges and democratization in Myanmar, it has to be said that the protection of the most essential values of democracy, right? These are the essential sort of human rights, right? Freedom of movement, freedom of speech, you know, freedom to participate in elections, right? These need to be protected. There needs to be, I mean, we cannot have, you cannot have a government that doesn't protect these things and expect that at the same time you have somehow democratic process, right? You might have structural improvements, but I think in the long term that will be very difficult. And I think, you know, sort of there was a question coming through a little bit and sort of, you know, why is the NLD doing what it's doing and how it's been acting? And I, you know, I've talked with many NLD politicians over the years, and there is a perception within the party that the party is aware of acting at times undemocratic, of defending, right? Like when the party like decided not to repeal Article 66D of the telecommunications law, that is a way of repressing criticism. You know, there's an awareness within the NLD that this is not completely in line with a democratic policy platform. But the justification is to say, well, while Myanmar is not entirely democratic, we can't afford to be entirely democratic either. Because we need have actually like sort of more control, simply because we have to navigate an environment where where it's not complete democracy, where the military still plays an important role. But I think, you know, looking forward, that's one of the things that will have to change, because I think that that's a really dangerous approach to kind of, if you delay your advocacy for democratic values, and you delay democratic decisions or democratic policies, then what you're inevitably doing to some extent is that you're more strongly consolidating, you know, whatever way you do behave. And if that's an more autocratic way, or if it's more authoritarian decision, you know, like the NLD took out the section on protecting media freedom and freedom of speech from its election manifesto now for this elections. I mean, these are the kind of developments that will have to be reversed, and we will have to get back to sort of an open advocacy of the ruling party for democracy and democratic values if we're to see more democratization.
Yeah, I cannot agree more, because South Korea was under the long authoritarian period, and this ruling bloc usually find a reason to delay democratizations. So I think I always compare Myanmar to the 70s and 80s of South Korea. Okay, Mo, what's your opinion?
You know, at one point in time, I was also looking at South Korea's democratization model to see how that could have some resonance in Myanmar's own experience. But okay, we're talking about Myanmar today. I think you know what Gosai and Richard have highlighted, I think, really points to this importance of looking at democracy and, you know, the transition to democracy, the democratization, and all the elements or the qualities of it, right? So yes, elections are one part, you know, the right to vote and stand in elections. Yes, that's one key element of democracy, but so too those freedoms that Richard has talked about, and also the respect for the rule of law. So when we come to that respect for the rule of law, right, this is where I start thinking we need a new roadmap of our own creation. And why I say this is because, you know, people who are familiar with Myanmar's recent political history will know that the current democratization process that we have is not one that was imagined by the people. It was something that was willed into reality by the military government. I said this at a panel yesterday as well. So we are living with this, something that was willed on us, this democratization process that was imagined and conceptualized and somehow you know, laid out in a roadmap, a so-called 7-step roadmap by the military. And you know, if you look at it, right, we are still in that final step of that roadmap of trying to construct a democratic union, right? So I think as long as the 2008 Constitution goes on as it is a constraint, and it will continue to be a constraint, you know, unless we try to negotiate this amendment. And what Gosai said about bringing in inputs from a wider range of stakeholders is also very important, because earlier on we were talking about how democracy promotion needs to be further entrenched beyond just, you know, voting for or against based on your own, you know, emotive response to the process, but really looking at that kind of, you know, deeper civic awareness and that kind of higher political awareness, which Gosai's surveys have been tracking. So I think that is the next step going forward in terms of, you know, the discussions or the conversations on what democracy means for us. We really need to do a lot more of that kind of civic advocacy and the education. You know, I used to naively think that as long as there's this kind of established process to discuss all these amendments and so on, you know, we could tackle that. But, you know, we've seen that process has run into roadblocks because either the military does not seem ready to relinquish the role and reach that it currently maintains in the country's political life, or, you know, how do they view their own role? They've been preparing for so-called returning to the barracks by preparing that economically. But the withdrawal from political life, I think, has its own complexities, you know, the 25% in parliament, the appointment of 3 ministerial portfolios and so on. So I think when we start discussing among all the stakeholders, I think, you know, one of the important stakeholders is also the military. You know, if they're part of the problem, they have to be part of the solution, simplistically. But those crucial conversations need to take place across that wide range when we talk about, you know, entrenching those values of democracy and getting that wider understanding towards the enlightened self-interest. And if you look at it, you know, the International Institute for Democracy and Electoral Assistance, International IDEA, they have this Global Democracy Index. I looked at Myanmar's position. It's in the mid-range of democratic performance. So looking at that, of course, we can see where are the areas that further need to be constructively dealt with. And again, you know, we're not that bad. If we look around in Southeast Asia, our neighboring countries and so on, ASEAN, Myanmar's democracy is not that bad in terms of voice and expression and freedom of choice. I mean, after all, look at the vote. We've showed that, we want to vote in the government. We want to elect the government that we want to chart the future. But so now the question now is, how do we chart that future, and how do we then, use our social collective action to continue with those consultative and communal actions that are also very central to democracy. So I think, there's a lot to be done. But again, going back to what I talked about, responding to the economic and social fallout of COVID-19, if you look at what are the challenges of addressing or responding to COVID-19, you will see the same kind of topics come up when we talk about democracy. There are questions of inclusion, there are questions of equality, there are questions of consultation, there are questions of going with evidence-based decisions. So I think these are important ingredients also for democracy, and we need to have that kind of more constructive dialogue and crucial conversations to find that common ground or mutual interest that all of us can agree to work on together. And call me an idealist, call me a constructivist, but I do believe in the power of dialogue and discussion.
Okay,
it's better it's better to be sitting across them, sitting face to face with them across the table than having them in the streets with guns.
Thank you. Kai, I guess your institute and your networks have studied a lot and under the local government setting. So there seems to be more cooperation between local government and civil society regionally. So what's your long-term prospect for the more to the path to democracy? You need to unmute.
Yeah, we actually to consolidate democracy, we need to promote civic engagement in every sphere of the society. I think that it's very important. Participatory democracy, we can call it. So the government, they need to create or enlarge these spaces. But what actually we are also seeing these spaces at the local level, but especially in Burma majority area. So actually, that's why sometimes it's very difficult for us to generalize blanketly and say that civil space is shrink completely in our country. So there are areas, especially I think that especially freedom of association, freedom of protest, something like that, especially in Rakhine State, internet. Internet service was disrupted, and then the student, Rakhine Arakan student, they protested, and they were sent to prison. That kind of thing should not have been, should not have occurred. But at the same time, there are areas where civic engagement is enhanced, especially at the township level now, especially in Burma majority regions, seven regions. So they are local people. They are actually working closely with the members of parliament, and township planning and implementation committee. So township planning and implementation committees they are responsible for coordination and implementing development projects. So the MPs, because they want to get votes from their constituency, they have to listen to their voices. So now the local voices are heard and then taken into account in budget planning and development process. But at the same time, I think that more deliberation, more institutionalization of these spaces, it's very, very important, very crucial to democratization, because usually these civic engagement, they are not up to now, they have not been formalized. So it depends on, sometimes it depends on context or something like that, yeah, personal context. So they're not, the government, they should formalize these civic engagement, civic space, and then so consult more, they should conduct more consultation, especially in the ethnic area, because the BRN project, Belt and Road Initiative project, the big mega project, these projects can have huge impact on the local community. Even now, the ethnic people, they feel excluded. They think that their voices are not heard with respect to these mega projects. So I think mechanism and the spaces should be created to listen to their voices. Otherwise, they don't have outlets to not to vent their anger or to give vent their grievances. I think that kind of mechanism very crucial in the next time.
Thank you, Kind. I guess I have only about 10 minutes to discuss, and I like this question. And Ye Aung has asked, even before we are discussing how we move to full-fledged, full democracy, we have to discuss the current quality of Myanmar democracy. And he or she is asking, Myanmar getting closer to liberal democracy or mob democracy, more populist democracy, I would say. If I add, you have a kind of problem in this Mabata movement and very aggressive the nationalistic Buddhism and that kind of things. Obviously is not close to the vision of liberal democracy. So I wonder, forget about the minority issues. If you just focus on the mainstream, how you assess the current quality of a democracy, looking at this very nationalistic Buddhism and that kind of mood that is critical to the quality of democracy in your country. So let's start from Kosai, and maybe you can speak just 2 minutes each.
For me, we are far away to live as a democracy. We are just stay on the path. We are just started exercising election. Election doesn't mean democracy. I mean, definitely democracy, every democracy have the election as a means to elect the government. But once we have the election and we can't live it, just simply live it, and then we got democracy. I don't think it is the right way to term our political system yet. So we are still very far away. I mean, we are just started the beginning. As Mamo just mentioned that this is the current framework is not from the people. It is not, we haven't owned this process yet. So we need to own this process and then we can move forward. I think that it's stay far away to assess the quality of the democracy. Yeah, I mean, it's stay too early.
Thank you, Richard.
Yeah, thank you very much for the question. I agree with Kosai. Today I would characterize or describe Myanmar as a hybrid regime, and it has parts that are authoritarian, and it has parts that are legitimately democratic. And it's the question what you do with this. There used to be this understanding that once you embark on a democratization process, somehow it just unfolds and we have you automatically kind of come to a consolidation stage. We don't think like that anymore today, and everyone knows that it's tough and it's not a sort of process where you know in what direction it's going to go. But one thing I would like to highlight is that, maybe for the first time in many decades, I think what this election has also shown is that the current state of affairs in Myanmar is fairly stable. Whatever powers the civilian power does have, they're fairly stable. Whatever control the military has, it's fairly stable. And let's not forget that for all the criticism that is there, and is rightly is right, but that the civilian government will again have a majority in both houses, any change that doesn't require constitutional amendment can be made. And within that, there is a great potential for making democratic progress and for making democratic policy. And I think so, looking in the future, while it's understandable that everyone wants progress on the big things, on constitutional amendment, on national reconciliation and peace, I think, you know, as said before, the military is not going to give up its power, you know, in the next 5 years. But if the civilian government focuses on all these possibilities that it has just by having the majority, and this could be anything, judiciary reform, you know, rule of law, you know, strengthening democratic principles, we talked about that, all of these things are technically possible. And that's also, I think, something I'd like to highlight.
Okay, well, I think somebody asked new questions about whether the Myanmar has the freedom of speech enough. So what's your reaction?
Yeah, I think, you know, it's true. We are probably hearing more criticisms because there is less silencing of voices. And I think that's a plus point. I mean, you know, what we see in democratic systems really is a constant kind of pushing the envelope, and it's a continuous kind of effort to not just like build the democracy, but once you believe that you have achieved some level of stability and the fundamentals of a democratic system, you continue building it, nurturing it, trying to improve it. So it's really of a continuous nature. And I think that is what we are seeing now. People's voices can't really be silenced. I think once the previous administration before the NLD, the USDP government suddenly let go of most of those restrictions on the internet, on censorship of the press and so on, once you've kind of like let that out, you can't really rate it all back in again. So then it would be how these conversations are continued. And I use that term crucial conversation in the sense that these are conversations you need to have at different levels among different communities, such that they provide that feedback to the executive, to the legislature, for that continuous improvement. So I think I would, because I always try to see things from that constructive viewpoint, I see this as essential. And as Gosai and Richard have also highlighted, the freedom of expression, along with freedom of worship, freedom of assembly, and all of that, they are essential characteristics also of democracy that we also need to continuously, you know, build and improve. I was just thinking about that continuous building and improving nature of democracy, you know. Democracy and part of that democracy, which are the electoral processes, they are not perfect. There are imperfections in the system, and these imperfections for me show where we need to focus on for continual improvement to reach that inclusive status that Gosai mentioned much earlier in the program, and also improve the quality of a democracy, which, you know, the country has to own. The citizens and the leadership have to own and lead that. And you know, I was just sharing this point also yesterday. Burma, still as a colony of the British, you know, as a British colony, in 1935 granted the vote to women, and it was, I think, the first country in Asia to give women the vote. And if you do that comparative thing, women in the United States had gained the vote in 1920, and women in the United Kingdom, Burma's colonial master at the time, had gained the vote in 1918, but only after how many centuries of asking for that vote. And if you look at the United States, African American men in the United States gained the right to vote in 1870, which was almost nearly a century after the United States became an independent sovereign state. And of course, the news that we see and hear in the present moment, of course, you know, reminds us of the imperfections in systems and practices and the continuous need to improve. So I'd just like to make that point again. you know, it is, I think, that continuous need to improve that Myanmar needs to bear in mind when it continues with that transition, and that need to improve requires inputs from all of us who have a stake in our country's political future.
Thank you. 2 minutes to Kind.
Yeah, I agree with Mamu. It's a continuous process. The Myanmar needs to improve its democratization. In my opinion, with respect to democratic governance, there have been progress in some area. For example, budget transparency. In the past, we cannot see the details of the budget. Now, budget transparency, it has not been up to international standard, so needs to be improved. But now, for example, budget transparency and policy areas, so government, they have to be accountable. They have to be accountable to the policy constituents. So that's why I think it's a kind of struggle. So there are areas which needs to be improved substantially, but also there are areas which have already improved a lot, something like that. So I think it will be democratization and democratic promotion of democratic governance. It will be a interesting, very interesting subject for all of us in Myanmar. We have to continue to monitor whether another government, another party is ruling or other party is ruling the country. So we have to get in touch with these with these issues, and the public must have access to information. That's very important. Access to information. That's why that we are also encouraging and pushing the government to be more transparent. So let the public get access to public information. So I think it will be very challenging for the government as well as for civil society and the public in the near and then medium term and long term. Thank you very much.
Thank you. It was fascinating discussions. My key takeaways from 4 distinguished panelists is that, number one, all of you seem to agree that despite some problem like canceling voting in Rakhine State, and also some problem about the Electoral Commission, I think all seem to agree that this election was fair, and you believe there's integrity of election process. But number two, but nevertheless, all of you have pointed out, Myanmar still needs a lot to reform to make a system more inclusive, to enfranchise the minority groups, and also changing the election rule more to proportional, maybe, rather than simple first past post system. And number three, and you believe the majority of the Myanmar people are very much committed to democracy. So there are much space and energy to reform to the future, to the stable path to further democratization, even though the current big picture was imposed from the top. So my wish is that all this popular mandate of NLD from the last election, they can, go for more positively and confidently to go, to the step by step toward full democracy. Thank you so much, participants from Myanmar and also Hamburg, Germany, and Singapore, and also South Korea. It was a fascinating talk, and I wish you all the best. And thank you for the participants for raising very important questions. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
감사합니다.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.